with constant mindfulness and mental alertness, accomplish others' good. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Remove suffering of limitless beings, understanding the purity of the three spheres, dedicate the virtue for making such effort to enlightenment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. For all who want to train on the bodhisattva path, I have written the 37 practices of bodhisattvas, following what has been said by the excellent ones on the meaning, sutras, tantras, and treatises. Though not poetically pleasing to scholars, owing to my poor intelligence and lack of learning, I've relied on the sutras and the words of the excellent, so I think these bodhisattva practices are without error. However, as the great deeds of bodhisattvas are hard to fathom for one of my poor intelligence, I beg the excellent to forgive all faults such as contradictions and non sequiturs. To the virtue from this, may all living beings gain the ultimate and conventional altruistic intention, and thereby become like the protector Chenrezig, who dwells in neither extreme, not in the world nor in peace. Good morning, everyone. Khenpo, I think, is in New York City today. He's going down um, Frederick, Maryland, too, for the TMC, the Tibetan Meditation Center. But I think that today, I think he's lingering in New York. And actually, I think my son-in-law is going to see him. He's down there visiting also. So just us today. And I had the thought, you kind of look out over our culture and our sort of common experience in that, and it's really amazing how Americans grab onto stuff and sort of get excited about it, and then maybe use it in their own way, and then it sort of becomes a business or something. I mean, we've certainly done that with Hatha Yoga, and to some extent with Tibetan Buddhism too. I mean, it was very interesting when the Hollywood kind of woke up to Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism. And there were two movies that came out, I think, in 1997. I think it was 97. Kundun by Martin Scorsese, and 7 Years in Tibet by who? I can't remember who did it. But anyway, big, both Oscar-nominated kind of movies. And yeah, there was kind of like this bubble of interest, really interesting. You had celebrities who were meeting with Tibetan lamas and this kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting like that. It really is. Um, oh, I don't know who that is either. I just remember as Brad Pitt. Or as our Tibetan friends would say, Brad Pitt, Brad Pitt. The teenage daughters of some of our Tibetan friends, they were in love with Brad Pitt. uh, because, the Dharma presents this incredible, really attractive jewel. I mean, the imagery and the color and the teachings and these mysterious figures. And of course, we're kind of entranced by our own mythology. I mean, for instance, Lost Horizons, the movie about Shambhala. Shambhala, the corruption of in the name of a pure land. And this author, James Hilton, turned it into this dramatic kind of knowledge. Everybody wants some mysterious, forgotten kingdom where everything is wonderful. All the beings are enlightened. Everyone's happy. It's completely divorced from the rest of the world. Pardon, what's that? The golden age. Well, we want that. We did a similar thing with China actually way back when. And when it started opening up to trade in the late 1700s, the clipper ships, these tremendous ships, the fastest sailing ships of all time, getting tea back and forth from China. There was this image of kind of like this Chinese society, at least traditionally, was this thing of scholars, tremendously rational, organized, like somehow better, a place that you could take refuge in. So there's all that, and it's kind of entertaining. But to see, the teachings are that it's very rare to, especially in the entire universe, to come across the Dharma at all, and to come across it at a time when Buddhas have existed, Buddhas have taught. It's not all Buddhas teach, and at a time when the teachings remain, so that you can really have this kind of discovery and connection with it. We have kind of a challenge here in the West too, because the Tibetans are convinced of the rightness of the Dharma. Tibetans are convinced that these practices work. They just completely don't have to be argued into acceptance of cause and effect in this profound spiritual way. So their teachings are all just giving you the methods by which this is done. A little bit challenge of us in the West, though, because most of us are trying to think, is this really valid? How does this relate to everything else? Can I trust this? Can I throw myself into it? What about this? What about that? All these kinds of things. Lama Tarchin said, for instance, that it's like we find ourselves in the middle of the ocean, foundering, and the Buddha comes and throws us a rope that's connected to the shore, and we grab onto that rope. And Lama Tarchin says, you can pull very quickly if you want, do lots of exertion to get to that shore. You can go a little bit hard and then rest. You can go a little bit hard and then slow. You can go slow and grab. You can do whatever you want. He said, just don't let go of the rope. That kind of attitude of the incredible necessity, really, of the Dharma. I think so often of the Buddha's experience, the idea of him leaving the motivation, it's unworldly, really, to leave your kingdom, your wife, whom everything says that he loved, and his firstborn son, and his obligation as a member of the warrior class to have a heir, all the obligations, and he walked away from all of that. Unbelievable, and not for some egotistic reason, Gee, I found a hottie in the next village. It just so far hard to understand. And then after this tremendous career of like 6 years exploring everything one way or the other, and tremendous disappointments, to have come to his awakening and omniscience. And what did he do? He hesitated to teach. To me, that's the most encouraging thing that I've ever heard in all these teachings and religions. It's that subtle. And to see how things get misused and how limited we are, really. Our thinking mind is a tremendous servant, but a terrible master. So the fact that he hesitated like that, to me, shows the validity of it. But nonetheless, just don't let go of the rope. We're fortunate because, there's been, well, especially the first 1,500 years, but then 1,000 more out of Tibet and China and Japan, where there's been, complete unfolding of the teachings of this initial insight, with all the stories that go along with it and all the kind of philosophical tools that allows one. It's all, again, useful. These are all tools. They're not the thing in themselves. But basically, yeah, we got this rope. The Buddha throws us a rope. Just don't let go of the rope. There's a famous dream that Shantou had. Shantou is one of the patriarchs of the Sutric Pure Land. And in his dream, he was running through a very hostile place, like a forest, and there were wild animals and even like demons. So these were like, fears and greeds, basically, his obstacles, his delusions in this forest. It's kind of threatening, and he's running, and he comes to a river, and there's this wide river and this narrow, and on one side of there's a narrow, like a ribbon, a white ribbon of light that's going across the the river. On the other side of the river is Buddha Amitabha in the Pure Land, and to upstream there's like flaming, everything's on fire, tremendous flames, and downstream everything is turmoil, like tsunami kind of level of agitation and water. So destruction by water, by destruction by fire. And here's this narrow little bridge of light, white light. And Buddha Shakyamuni is behind him. And Shakyamuni is saying, go onto this bridge of light. And of course he's fearful. And Amitabha's on the other side beckoning him, and Buddha Shakyamuni's behind saying, go. And so for whatever reason, his positive karma, he takes a step. And as he goes farther and farther on this narrow bridge of light, it broadens and it supports him, and it becomes broader and broader and broader. So this completely easy path going to the Pure Land. These are sutric teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, that this is what our situation is. And yet we have this means of liberation, but it looks like a very narrow path, but it's totally wonderful. And on the other shore, Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light. It's said in the Pure Land, even the birds are teaching the Dharma, even the sound of the waters and the brooks are all teaching the Dharma. Everything is conducive to Dharma. And you can go to different Pure Lands. You can wake up in the morning and say, gee, I'd like to take some teachings from Buddha Akshobhya, and you can go there instantly because it's all mental. Everything is wonderful. Even the name of suffering is not in that Pure Land. So that's the sutra teachings. Further preserved, and especially this is what sort of gets the Tibetans their reputation, although generally people don't know what they're talking about, are all of the extraordinary Mahayana teachings, the tantric teachings. And this is where we're actually in the Pure Land. We're sporting around in the Pure Land right now. And that seems unbelievable. But if you don't have the basic teachings, you're going to misinterpret those things. So there are lots of protections around the tantric or the mantrayana path, the vajrayana it's called. All these different terms get thrown at us and can be sort of confusing and overwhelming. Recognizing our nature right now as it is, and therefore it's actually valid to impute a Buddhahood unto ourselves. To give you a little bit of an idea how this works, because it's the very high teaching, you might say. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah. Yeah, so we can create ourselves as a Buddha, visualize ourselves as a Buddha. From beginningless time, in life after life, the basis of imputation for our I has been only a contaminated body and mind. So if you think about it, what is the key thing in our life? It's this I. Everything is rotating around this I. I do everything with this I in mind. It's like our fundamental reality, whether it's happy or sad, doing great things, doing shameful things. Some of that I is the story. It's the star of the show. But we've never looked at that I. How does it exist? Is it really there? And if so, in what ways does it function? Is there a way does it have a nature? What is it? So from beginningless time, life after life, the basis of imputation for our I has been only a contaminated body and mind. Because our I is imputed upon a contaminated body and mind, whenever we develop the thought I, we simultaneously experience the ignorance of self-grasping, a mind grasping at an inherently existent I and mine, which is the root of all our sufferings. And now you can see why the Buddha hesitated to teach, because it seems like absolute truth to us. We do silently, we don't know we've even done it, but we impute this I on this body and mind. You know, it's my body, my mind. Those are fighting words if you challenge that. But here we have this body and mind that are sort of stained with dissatisfactory stuff. However, for qualified tantric practitioners, their deep realization of divine pride, Vajra pride, prevents the ignorance of self-grasping from arising. So there's no basis for their experiencing suffering, and they will enjoy their pure environment. So what is he saying here? If you impute, you visualize yourself as a Buddha, and you impute your I onto that. I am Tara. I am Chenrezig. If you do that, in that mind stuff, there's no nature of suffering. Lama Tarchin said it's like, you know, we have this tantric practice. He says it's like there's a giant mountain, and that mountain has a lake, the lake of suffering. That mountain is what we've projected all these lifetimes, the reality of all of this stuff, including our stuff, this whole ego thing, the whole thing, this giant, giant construct. And it holds a lake that's called suffering and is full of water. And he said, when you get your mind into your central channel of the subtle body, that the mountain disappears. And the mountain disappears, there's no lake of suffering being held up anymore. Instantaneously gone. It's beyond wonderful. We may ask how, if practitioners are not yet actually the Buddha, Tara, or whomever, how can they believe that they are? And how is it possible for them to gain the realization of divine pride if their view, believing themselves to be Tara, is a mistaken view? Although these practitioners are not real Tara, nevertheless, they can believe that they are, because they have changed their basis of imputation from their contaminated aggregates of body and mind to the uncontaminated aggregates of Tara. Believing themselves to be Buddha is not a mistaken view, because it is non-deceptive and arises from the wisdom realizing that the inherently existent I and mine do not exist, and that's called emptiness. So when we impute Frank onto this collection of aggregates, we think that's real. Whereas if I impute it onto Tara, I think, well, that's not really real. It's so interesting. So the power of the mind that's there, and that, of course, is the root of our suffering, dealing with the mind. Non-deceptive. It's non-deceptive because the inherently existing I and mind do not exist. So when I do this gross worldly thing that we're all doing all the time of imputing this ego onto this collection of body and mind, we think that's absolutely solid right? Absolutely true. It's scientific. But when we impute it onto an imagined form, we think that's false. But it's because there's no absolutely existing ego in that way. It's not false. It's actually closer to true. You might say true. Their realization of divine pride that spontaneously believes themselves to be Tara, therefore has the power to prevent the ignorance of self-grasping, the root of samsara, from arising. So if you do this seemingly artificial step, visualizing yourself as Tara, to the degree that you actually can get into that and believe that, there's no basis from which the suffering to arise, because in her nature, there is no suffering. That's what the teaching says. But we also experience it ourselves. The sadhanas, these practices, these tantric practices, sadhana means the means of accomplishment. And it's remarkable to me. It's like a symphony. It's going all these different things going on, so to speak. Often overwhelms us as practitioners because we don't know what's going on. And it can seem very elaborate and we don't understand the symbolism, all sorts of stuff. But what's interesting in there is this constant reinforcement of you are Buddha, you are Buddha. It recognizes that we doubt again and again and again. Why? Because we're in this human body and we've practiced doubt forever. It just seems something radically true. And so there's constant reminder. So for instance, you drop all attachment to ordinary appearances, and what comes up is the seed syllable. And then light is radiating out to all the Buddhas, blessings coming back. That light, you are that seed syllable. The light goes out to all the sentient beings, blessing them, coming back to you. And then you transform and you are Tara. And we go along and we're doing various rituals and practices and that. But then what do we do? Well, we're starting to doubt a little bit, right? And so in the text, we say, well, this is just the commitment being. This is the commitment Tara. This is not the real Tara, the wisdom Tara. So, okay, what am I going to do right now? Out of my commitment being Tara, I'm going to say a mantra, and I'm invoking the wisdom Tara, the real deal, to show up. And she does. And then we're still doubting. So what do? Well, we do more mantra and we unify with the wisdom, because we can't believe that we are actually the wisdom being Tara. So it's extremely skillful. Things do not exist from their own side. There are no inherently existent I, mine, and other phenomena. All phenomena exist as mere imputations. And isn't this true? We know this from our own meditations, from our own analysis of the world. That chair is a chair because we're imputing the name chair on it. But it's just a mere name. It's totally useful. It's a good thing to do. It's not a radish. It is a chair. We sort of have a collective understanding of what a chair means. Therefore, it's useful. We can do it. You can use it. We can have a world with chairs. That's a good thing. It allows us to practice virtue. But we know scientifically, you go into it, there's no chair there. So it's our imputation, mere name. Things are imputed upon their basis of imputation by thought. What does basis of imputation mean? For example, parts of a car are the basis of imputation for the car. The parts of a car are not the car, but there's no car other than its parts. Car is imputed upon its parts by thought. But how? Through perceiving any of the parts of the car, we naturally develop the thought, this is the car. Similarly, our body and mind are not our I or self, but they are the basis of imputation for our I or self. Our I is imputed upon our body or mind by thought. Through perceiving our body or mind, we naturally develop the thought, I or mine. Without a basis of imputation, things cannot exist. Everything depends upon its basis of imputation. Your name. Why is it necessary to change the basis of imputation for our I? So this is generation practice in Tantric Buddhism. We're changing the basis for our imputation of I. When that first mantra is done in the text, Om Svabhava, we're dropping our attachment to ordinary appearances. That's what we're doing. Instead of our ordinary basis of imputation, which is our body and mind, is flesh and mind, the psychological mind, this mind stream. Instead, now we arise as Tara, for instance. As mentioned above, since beginningless time, life after life until now, the basis of imputation for our I has only been contaminated aggregates of body and mind. Because the basis of imputation for our I is contaminated by the poison of self-grasping ignorance, we experience the endless cycle of suffering. To free ourselves from suffering permanently, we therefore need to change our basis of imputation from contaminated aggregates to uncontaminated aggregates. How can we change our basis of imputation? In general, we have changed our basis of imputation countless times. In our previous lives, we took countless rebirths, and each time the basis of imputation for our I was different. When we took a human rebirth, our basis of imputation was a human body and mind. And when we took an animal rebirth, our basis of imputation was an animal's body and mind. Even in this life, when we were a baby, our basis of imputation was a baby's body and mind. When we were a teenager, our basis of imputation was a teenager's body and mind. And when we grow old, our basis of imputation will be an old person's body and mind. All these countless bases of imputation are contaminated aggregates. We have never changed our basis of imputation from contaminated to uncontaminated aggregates. Only through relying upon Buddha's tantric teachings can we accomplish this. We change our basis of imputation from contaminated to uncontaminated aggregates by training in clear appearance and divine pride. As Buddha explained, first we learn to purify our body and mind by meditating on the emptiness of the body, mind, and all other phenomena. Perceiving only emptiness, we then generate ourselves as enlightened Buddha. So again, in the tantric practice, the sadhana, they all start out with that mantra, Om Svabhava. Why? Because that's where we're practicing emptiness. You can't think of yourself as Frank suddenly has a much greater name. He's calling himself Tara now. He's running around town making all sorts of trouble. If you have the same imputation and just change the name, that's not what it's about. We then learn to perceive clearly our body and mind as Tara's body and mind, our world as Tara's Pure Land, and those around us as enlightened Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is called training in clear appearance. Perceiving, or pure appearance, is pure view, it's often called too. Perceiving our body and mind as the uncontaminated aggregates of Tara's body and mind, we develop the thought, I am Tara. We then meditate on this divine pride continually with single-pointed concentration until we gain a deep realization of divine pride that spontaneously believes we are Tara. At that time, we have changed our basis of imputation from contaminated to uncontaminated aggregates. So now you see the importance of faith, because this is not something that just happens because you decide to declare yourself Tara. The habit is so strong. This is the great power of meditation, is that we see how habitual our arisings are in the mind and how we attach to them. It's like Emerson said, things in the saddle riding mankind, but in this case, it's thoughts in the mind pushing us around. So the faith comes in because we see the basis for this. And then more importantly, you've met people like a great teacher, who somehow gives you an existential confidence in the rightness of all this. So all this tremendous, if you think about the complexity, say in a a software program, for instance, when you see all that code, my mind's just glaze over. And so too with medicine and the complexities of healing. And at core, you might think of it as very simple, but at the same time, the method can seem exceedingly complex. If we are normally called John, for example, we should never believe that John is Tara, but feel that John disappeared into emptiness before we generated as Tara. So again, Om Svabhava, we're dropping all ordinary appearances. But out of that emptiness, out of that tremendous potentiality, that limitlessness, and it's limitlessness because we can't even grab onto it. It's both vast and tiny. You can't say anything about it. It's like it says in the Samantabhadra prayer, there are billions of Buddhas on a speck of dust. What does that mean? So out of that emptiness, what arises? Ourselves as the seed syllable. So in that sense, like it says, John or Frank is gone. Something coming out of emptiness, which is pure. We then believe that our I, which is imputed upon Tara's body and mind, is Buddha. This belief is not a mistaken view because it arises from wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness, how things actually do exist. This belief is not a mistaken view because it arises from wisdom, whereas mistaken views necessarily arise from ignorance. The realization of divine pride arises from wisdom and is a powerful method for accumulating great merit and wisdom. Even if we have the realization that spontaneously believes that we are Tara, we should never indicate or declare this to others, as such behavior is inappropriate in normal society. People will still see us as John and not Tara, and we also know that John is not Tara. The realization of divine pride and clear appearance are inner experiences that have the power to control our delusions, and from which pure actions naturally develop. There is therefore no basis for us to show inappropriate behavior. We must continue to engage in our daily activities and communicate with others as normal. So that's sort of the idea, you might say, of tantric practice. But it all goes back to realizing that we're in this ocean foundering, and that the Buddha throws us a rope. Just keep pulling on the rope. Just don't let go of the rope. And eventually you get to the shore. On the shore, you can actually, practice even more effectively. But it takes us to the Buddha's Pure Land, where everything is conducive. But with the Tantra, we can sort of jump there, so to speak. That's why it's said that the Tantra is the most efficacious practice, especially in our time of degeneracy. It's because we're transforming the negative emotions. The ordinary sutric conventional practice is twofold. One is the self-liberation aspect, and there we're training ourselves in our mind to be looking at our mind. That's what meditation does. We're increasing our awareness through these various methods of mindfulness and that, but basically we're increasing our awareness or becoming more aware of our awareness. It's kind of shining through all the lattices of delusion and attachment. So we're aware of more and more. And the first thing is self-liberation. When we see the negative minds arise, the negative thoughts out of which we act and are motivated by negative karma, creating suffering for ourselves. When we just see the process that when those arise, now we've trained ourselves because we recognize them, just don't go there. So we just don't go there. When hatred comes up, we just don't go there. It's like an abandonment or renunciation. And that is self-liberation. But the other aspect of conventional dharma is when the negative mind arises, we've trained ourselves through study and practice to generate the antidote. So it's not just that we now see the anger arise, but I said, oh, yes, I apply the antidote, which is patience. So now, instead of just staying away, like, so someone, as a contributing cause, someone generates anger, right? It's someone in your mind stream, you see them and something, you don't like them, anger comes up. So in the self-liberation way, we just don't go there. We just sort of abandon those people. But now with conventional Mahayana practice, that negative person is there. The anger comes up. Now we're practicing patience. So they are part of our mind more. We're not abandoning them. We're not necessarily hugging them or getting in trouble with them, but instead we recognize them as having been our mother, and we're going to save them. It can be a totally inner process. But my point is, instead of just arbitrarily cutting off parts of reality so that we can be liberated, which is nothing wrong with that, we're on the path, but this is going a step farther, where now we're suddenly embracing this whole world of negativity because we're practicing the antidotes. So that's the conventional path of the Mahayana. It leads to Buddhahood. It's time tested and proven. But the tantric method is actually to transform that anger. So that anger is transformed into the penetrating insight of Vajrasattva. Because in our anger and hatred, if you think about it, there is really some sharp understanding there. We're actually maybe seeing things in a very kind of direct and powerful way, but it's like we can't handle it. It's like, it's like we have a copper wire at our heart in the center of our body, but it can only handle so much voltage. And when we get the power of anger, it shorts out onto other people, and that's hatred. So what we're doing with understanding emptiness and wisdom and all the teachings is we're increasing the capacity of that wire. It's getting thick and thick until it's like a giant cable. Now you can take all the anger in the world and pass it through that cable, and there's no problem. So this is the tantric path. This is, hard to understand, perhaps hard to believe. We don't have any equivalent really in our culture. And yet we have the example. And then it's like I was telling people the story this morning of, we go in the teachings from all the conventional teachings. And then there's, in our particular path, you go into the tantric teachings, the teachings of Mahamudra. You can say the formless Mahamudra, direct recognition of the nature of mind every instant. And then there's the form Mahamudra, which is called the 6 yogas of Naropa. So these very powerful esoteric techniques, which are actually maybe even more effective because they use form. So because we're attached to form, we can use form, subtle forms, a little bit helpful. But nonetheless, these 6 yogas in Naropa are so profound. And Garwan Rinpoche has joked that, that he himself was taught on the 6 yogas in Naropa and, did some practice on them. He said, but my teacher, Chime Dorje, he said, oh my goodness, he was a great teacher. He did something like 12-year retreat on the 6 yogas in Naropa. And he said he was so wonderful. He would travel with his horse around from village to village in Tibet. And yeah, he was so powerful that people would come out to see him and the horse would teach the Dharma. This is hard for us to believe. I understand. But when you start having contact with someone who would say that, and he's never lied about anything else, and then you see the qualities there, qualities that allow you to develop some of your own qualities. We're extremely fortunate, But we have to understand. We have to understand the great emptiness. We have to understand the vast loving kindness and compassion. This isn't some sort of a trick. It isn't some sort of a marketing ploy. It isn't some sort of way to gain power and fame and money, all of that. And we have the advantage of looking at 2,600 years of tradition, the good, bad, and the ugly. It's there. And that's really helpful. Okay, I've talked way too much, of course, but I was kind of moved this morning and how fortunate we are and the challenge that we have that the Tibetans with their kind of faith that we have in Einstein. I can't tell you anything about Einstein, but I do believe he did something valid and worthwhile. That's what the Tibetans are with Dharma. Their George Washington was a monk. Their Einstein was a monk. They have a natural kind of confidence, whether they know the Dharma technically or not, which is very helpful. And so they go around the world and they share these methods. But to have an appreciation, why are we doing this at all? How does this speak to Westerners kind of awash in our modern materialistic culture or a kind of crassly theocentric beliefs? How does that work? Okay, let's stop here. We'll have some tea. Yeah, I want a question. We got a
I think I need a little reminder.
hmm,
So who's doing the imputing? So you use the passive verb a lot. So
yeah,
the I is imputed onto the contaminated body.
right,
So help me remember who's doing the imputing then.
right,
The
right,
I is imputing upon the I.
right, right. That's the paradox of it, is that we, with our limited understanding, posit an I, and the I imputes on itself. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Awareness, but a kind of a limited awareness. So there's really nothing wrong with it in a sense that you got to get kicked out of the universe for doing this. It's not we're all going to hell because of this. We create hell. It's that powerful. It's like ignorance is misleading to us too, because, again, in our culture, ignorance is like stupidity or something, right? It's a big insult. But ignorance in Sanskrit is avidya. It's just simply not seeing. There's like no moral stain to it. So out of our not seeing, what our limited understanding, what seems real is this separation, this alienation seems natural. Um, and so, yeah, out of that understanding, the awareness itself, imputes a limited awareness as having kind of a capital A awareness. It's really, we're doing it to ourselves in a very, very tragic kind of way. And I think it's really true. The Buddhist view is a tragic view. It's that we're trying for happiness. People are naturally wired for happiness, but they're getting the opposite of results. Um, so yeah, cruel. But in the end, truly, it's a mystery because again, if you think of a billion Buddha realms on one speck of dust, that can't make any sense. But it's that mind, unrecognized, that is doing the imputing. We do the imputing whether we like it or not. I mean, if you think about it going around, we naturally do it as kids. I mean, we learn, but table, chair, that's my mother, that's my father. We can't function without that imputation. I think it's actually evolutionary, is that we're not evolving with our the awareness of our limitless mind, but rather this functional mind. What's going to help me perpetuate my genes? What's going to prevent me from doing that? It's like an unconscious thing that's going on, and there's nothing wrong with all of that, but it's just limited. It's not seeing the whole picture. And when we start to look at the whole picture, um, for many people, it can be like scary because we think we're going to find happiness, refuge, whatever, in just maximizing this, increasing whatever the attachments are, pushing away whatever the fears are, and then somehow that's going to be okay. But that alienated state itself is suffering, is subtle suffering. That alienated state itself just guarantees, because it's impure. And yet, at the same time, to see how we're limited, Chuck, I mean, these are all just concepts that we're throwing around. they're just concepts, and the concepts themselves, are just fingers pointing at the moon. So we're in this situation where it's, yeah, how do you explain it? Someone has actual confidence in some of this, someone who will sort of jump outside of the magic circle, or at least transform it. Okay, I don't know if that's answering anything, but yeah, who? But on the other hand, let me say one other thing then, because it's actually a very profound question you have. Who's doing the imputing? In the whole world of um, Zen Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, they have basically two great traditions within there. One is in Soto in Japan. The Soto school is just sitting, such faith in your Buddha nature that you just sit with it. You don't do anything, believing that there's this graduating, ripening process. So it's like that. But the whole other tradition within that is called Rinzai or Linchi in Japan. And that's the use of the koans. Koans are like legal precedents, the nub of something. And the most famous one is who? Who is sitting here doing all this? And you bore into that who one pointedly. Who? Any thoughts? Forget about it. Who? This doesn't make any sense. It comes from of an interaction with a great master. I can't remember his name in Chinese, but Joshu in I can't remember his name in Chinese, but Joshu in Japanese. And monks would come to him and say, "Does a dog have a Buddha nature?" And sometimes he would say yes. And people like us are satisfied with that. Okay, I'll study a little bit more. How is everything of Buddha nature? This is great. But once a monk came to him, who was at sort of a different spot in his development, and with pain said, "Does a dog have a Buddha nature?" Because in Chinese society, dogs are pretty low. And he said, "No," and yelled at him. And the man was shocked and came to realization because he had all his concepts destroyed in that, because he had been a good monk. He had been studying for decades and knew that a dog had Buddha nature, but somehow he was bothered here because he couldn't find it. So in the end, it's like that. That question, who is asking that question, is extremely valuable. And to have doubt on that is not bad at all. That can be a motivating, generating thing for looking deeper, deeper, deeper. Other than that, I don't have a neat answer for you. Let me think. I'm trying to think. Uh, it might be, I might remember this wrong, but someone said of all the 10 things you didn't have to wonder about, one Buddha said was why. Okay, let's take a break. We'll ring a bell as always.